You're watching a Highwire Media podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Dead Reckoning podcast. As always, I'm your host, Larry Lease. Today's episode, we are diving into the life and legacy of one Grigori Rasputin. Before we begin, let me know your thoughts on this topic in the comments section below. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy our content. So with that, let's dive right in, shall we? It's June 1915. Night falls over Moscow. The weary citizen seeks solace inside the welcoming walls of the Yar, or Yar restaurant, a popular restaurant and nightclub. Which, a restaurant and nightclub, I don't really understand. Like, eating at a nightclub? It's like restaurant's quiet place where you generally have conversation. Nightclubs, very loud place where it's impossible to talk to anyone. What are you supposed to do? Like, I've been to bars. It seems like something more like when I was a student or a younger person, but you go to a bar and you'd be like, yeah, okay, let's eat a little. But the music's so loud, you're kind of just eating crappy food while there's enormously loud music playing. You're like, what? What did you say? I don't get it. I generally hate nightclubs. Haven't been to a nightclub in a long time, and I don't miss it at all. Like, that's a young person's game, and fuck that. It's just so loud, and there's so much drinking. Now, as an older person, I'm like, loudness and drinking? Nah, I'm good, I'll stay home. Here, they can share a drink, a song, or the latest gossip about the royal court. Oh yeah, this is pre-revolution Moscow, of course. The Russian Empire has been fighting in the Great War against the Central Empires for almost a year now, and the people are not happy. The Muscovites are quick to blame the Emperor Tsar Nicholas and Tsarina Alexandra for the disastrous conduct of the conflict. But they are even quicker to blame their friend and spiritual advisor, Siberian peasant Grigori Rasputin. This man likes to portray himself as a mystic, a healer, a sage. Peasant is a word that comes up in many conversations. The man likes to portray himself as a mystic, a healer, a sage, but spicy's rumors swirl untamed around Moscow and St. Petersburg, telling tales of a drunken Rasputin engaging in unchecked carnal congress with aristocratic ladies, and perhaps even with the Tsarina. Yeah, Rasputin's a fascinating one, isn't he? Because he smells. Didn't he not bathe very often? He's kind of just this smelly peasant. And somehow, he's got such god-level charisma that he works his way into the royal court. And people love him. And it's like that, Rasputin. You're a smelly peasant. Suddenly, the attention of the Yar's patrons turn to a thin, tall, bearded man, causing a drunken ruckus a few tables apart. The man looks familiar. Of course he does. It's Grigori Rasputin, the mad monk. Rasputin, visibly and irreversibly smashed, jumps onto a table, lowers his trousers, and reveals to Moscow his swinging and impressive manhood. As the crowd gasps, the Siberian bellows, "This is the tool that rules Russia, before which the Empress prays." This is perhaps one of the most famous anecdotes about Grigori Rasputin, which contributed to perpetuating his legend. Stories like these inspired Boney M's 1978 single Rasputin. Its immortal lines. Rasputin, lover of the Russian queen. There was a cat that was really gone. Rasputin, Russia's greatest love machine. It was a shame how he carried on. I feel like I know this song, but I have no idea how it goes. And it's honestly better for you that I don't try and sing it. Bob Dylan surely did not lose sleep over these verses. His crown as arguably popular music's greatest lyricist remained unchallenged. But the 1978 disco hit was nonetheless effective in perpetuating the dark legend of the so-called Mad Monk. Was he a demonic lover, a saintly healer, a prophet, or perhaps even an opportunistic spy? All the above. If you are even remotely familiar with the character of Rasputin, chances are that you've been fed a highly sensationalized version of a complex, well-rounded, and contradictory human being, as we all are. If you've heard about Rasputin, you've probably heard him described as a schemer, a manipulator, a devious alcoholic con man who ingratiated his way into the court of the Romanov Tsars to manipulate their policies, while threatening the virtue of the Tsarina and her daughters with his robust sexual appetites. A subsection of this school of thought claims that Rasputin was in fact a German agent, directed by puppet masters in Berlin who sought to weaken Russia's leadership and knock the country out of World War I. In recent years, circles close to the Orthodox Church and Romanov loyalists have spun a different take on Rasputin, portraying him as a quasi-saintly figure, a miracle worker capable of healing the sick and predicting the future. Well, we know they're wrong because miracles to heal the sick aren't real, and neither is predicting the future. I mean, these things are both real in a way, like miracles happen. Someone has like terrible cancer, and then it goes away, and you're like, oh my god, you defied the odds. You're like that 1.1%, aren't you? That everyone hopes for. And then predicting the future, of course it's possible, like I can predict that I'm going to have lunch today. Boom, easy. Unfortunately, Rasputin's reputation was ruined by slander thrown at him by enemies of the Tsar. The thesis of this revisionist take is that during the 1910s, both left-wing revolutionaries and ultra-conservative circles wanted to get rid of the Romanovs, either to replace them with a communist Republican government or with another autocratic ruler, and by attacking Rasputin, these factions sought to indirectly discredit the Tsars. Also, those who wish to portray Rasputin as an orthodox religious icon like to splash intriguing brushstrokes of a spy story onto the canvas. Rasputin was known to have advised the Tsar against entering World War I. As such, he was despised by the Entente allies. Could it be that his assassination may have been orchestrated by the British Secret Services? Well, it's been 100 years plus, so I get the feeling this is something that would have come out. Like there'd be declassified documents or someone would have spilled the beans. So the fact that this is the first time hearing of it does make it seem quite unlikely. The more you look at Grigori Rasputin's life, the more you find for the dark side fodder. Did he really have supernatural healing powers? Was he able to accurately predict the future? Was he really at the center of a conspiracy involving the German and/or British Secret Services? I think we can answer those questions with no, probably not, and, well, maybe. Who knows? Oh, there's another one. What was he really like beyond a graphic myth and salacious slander? Excuse me. Let's take a look at the man's biography. Along the way, I will point out which elements are normally incorporated into Rasputin's life accounts, despite being overly exaggerated or plain made-up rumors. I shall then deep dive into the more mysterious elements of his legacy. But before we kick off, may I recommend to those viewers and listeners who are not driving, working, or looking after children to pour themselves a glass of wine. Apparently this was Rasputin's favorite beverage. Grigori Rasputin was born on January the 21st, 1869, in the town of Pokrovskoye. I'm going to butcher these names. Western Siberia, let's just say that. Back then, part of the Russian Empire. Grigori was the 8th child born to Anna and Yefim, a farmer and government courier. The Rasputins did not live exactly in abject poverty, but life was not easy either. Grigori had 8 siblings in total, but only he and his younger sister survived into adulthood. Not much is known about Grigori's early years. According to most popular accounts, he was something of a not-so-good teenager, allegedly being arrested at one point for the theft of a horse. Apparently this is a rather serious crime in Siberia back then, which carried a lengthy prison sentence. Yeah, horse theft. Didn't it used to be, punishable with death in some parts of the world because, horses were seen as so important? According to historian Douglas Smith, author of Rasputin, Faith, Power, and the Twilight of the Romanovs, published in November 2016, this whole story is worth as much as the intestinal product of said horse. Grigori was in fact incarcerated for a brief period of time, but only for insulting a local official. By the way, Douglas Smith is probably the only biographer of Rasputin who's actually sought confirmation of his life stories in official records. Excuse me. If he's the only one, what are the other biographers doing? Just being like, yeah, I guess I'll just take that rumor as fact and write it down and sell a book. Yeah, I guess books aren't exactly peer-reviewed, are they? So people just be like, that was entertaining. What a good book. It's thanks to Smith that we're able to discuss Rasputin's life in a balanced, non-sensationalist way. So allow me to raise a toast to that legend, Gallo, drinking his wine. Since birth, the young prince suffered from hemophilia, condition likely inherited from his great-grandmother, Queen Victoria. Hemophiliac patients suffer from a deficiency in factor 8, a clotting protein, That means that even small wounds or traumas may result in excessive bleeding, even life-threatening bleeding. Blood loss may occur internally in the joints or muscles, provoking intense pain. And that sounds really miserable. Can we treat that these days? Do they have stuff to treat hemophilia? I feel like they do. Somehow Rasputin's intervention caused the bleeding episode to stop. The Tsarina Alexandra was awestruck by the Siberian's healing powers and summoned him to court on several other occasions. According to author Sergei Fomin, Rasputin healed Alexei in March 1912, October 1912, July 1913, through to 1916. We shall dive deeper into these healing occurrences in a later section. Following the first, apparently miraculous healing of little Alexei, Rasputin was invited to court every time he popped up in St. Petersburg and gradually became a confidant to the royal couple, mainly to Tsarina Alexandra. And allegedly through his influence on Alexandra, he was able to manipulate the Tsar himself, steering his decisions, his policies, and even deciding behind the scenes important ministerial appointments. It's kind of amazing. Like this guy, I mean, obviously he's not healed this kid, so it's just like some con that he's doing or whatever. But it's kind of impressive. Like he's just He's ingratiated himself, and now he's in the halls of power just like that. Charisma. Pure charisma. Our good old pal Douglas Smith downplays Rasputin's influence. Sure, Tsar Nicholas went down in history as a particularly incompetent and weak-willed autocrat, but according to Smith, rather than being spineless, he was simply not interested in ruling. This lack of interest manifested itself in another way. When Rasputin advised Alexandra towards a certain decision, Alexandra asked Nicholas to implement such a decision. The Tsar would go, "Yeah, yes, right, whatever you say, dear," and then do absolutely nothing, or he didn't act someone else's advice. Nonetheless, Nicholas tolerated the presence of Rasputin at court, as it had a calming effect on his wife, who was often subject to deep anxiety. He once told Prime Minister Pyotr Stolypin, "Better 10 Rasputins than one of the Empress's hysterical fits." But Russian elites at the time had a different view. They saw the Siberian mystic as a negative influence on the court, one that could instill in the Tsar unwanted concern towards the plight of the masses, the poors, the peasants. Oh, the horror. Oh no, he'll make us think about poor people. I hate thinking about poor people. Gross. This is when the slander campaign towards Rasputin, and indirectly the Tsarina, first began. Since 1909, the mystic had been under the watchful eye of the feared Tsarist secret police, overseen by Stepan Beletsky and later by General Januszkiewicz. And the police filled the reports with accounts of Rasputin's scandalous conduct. Yes, it is true that the mad monk overindulged in Madeira, and yes, when drunk, he could erupt in a rambunctious dance routines when it was least appropriate. Indefinitely, he behaved inappropriately with his female companions and frequently sought the services of sex workers. But according to Smith, the Okhrana overplayed these elements, peppering in allegations of sexual assaults and even scandalous rumors of an affair with the Tsarina. By 1911, Prime Minister Stolypin had bought into the narrative and convinced the Tsar to expel Rasputin from the court. But Alexandra pleaded on his behalf. Nicholas caved in, and the mystic was once again welcomed in St. Petersburg. Rasputin continued to collect enemies, however. One of them was an Orthodox priest called Father Eliodor, allegedly jealous of Rasputin's influence in spiritual matters. According to author Sergei Foreman, Leodor inspired an assassination attempt against Rasputin. This took place on June the 29th, 1914, in his hometown of Pokrovskoye. I'm going to butcher these names, and I apologize. A young woman believed Rasputin to be a... Yeah... you know what they mean. Other than, as well as a violent predator, a false prophet, and the Antichrist. And they stabbed him in the stomach. Despite the bad wound, they managed to fend her off with a stick until she was arrested. Guseva was found not guilty for reasons of insanity and confined to a mental hospital. Rasputin was also hospitalized and underwent a long and painful recovery throughout July of 1914. All the while, a major crisis was developing in Europe. Just a day before the attempt on Rasputin's life, Archduke Franz Ferdinand had been shot in Sarajevo, and the continent was on the brink of war. From his hospital, Rasputin sent some 20 telegrams to the Tsar, pleading with him to stay out of the Great War. One of those telegrams contained a prophecy. If Nicholas entered the conflict, it would be the end of Russia and the Tsar. Now, we'll get into the details of the prophecies in a later section, but as far as predictions go, this proved to be accurate. And to be fair, one doesn't need a mystic with supernatural powers to get this one right. War doesn't usually bring happiness and prosperity. And Rasputin was a well-traveled man who had rubbed shoulders with both the common folk and the elites. He might have correctly assumed that the Russian economy, institutions, and military were not prepared to wage war against Germany and Austria-Hungary. He also knew that Nicholas's throne was still on very fragile legs, and that a disastrous war might cause his downfall. Yeah, it's not rocket science, is it? It's just like, okay, well, look at this and look at that. That's probably what's going to happen. Done. I'm sure his advisors had. Maybe the advisors just shut up and were like, yes, your majesty, a war we shall have, and a war we shall win, your majesty. And Rasputin's like, bro, no, it's not going to work. As predicted, things didn't go well for the Russian army. Seeking a scapegoat, Russian elites doubled down on their slander towards Rasputin. That is when the famous story about the incident at the Yar restaurant started circulating. The scene I described at the beginning, when Rasputin aimed his artillery at the patrons, claiming that it was the tool that ruled Russia. So was the story true? Well, once again, we have Douglas Smith and his debunking powers to quote him. Saying, quote, "What I was able to do is, in Moscow, at the State Archive of the Russian Federation, was to finally get a hold of the police files on Rasputin, which are voluminous, massive. And by going back and looking at the daily reports of what had happened, I was able to see very clearly that the whole story was invented by police hacks in an attempt to frame Rasputin." It seems that Rasputin wasn't even in Moscow in June of 1915, but he did relocate to St. Petersburg after September 1915. That's when Tsar Nicholas took over command of its troops and left the capital for the front, delegating internal affairs to the Tsarina, who promptly summoned Rasputin to court. He would be dead little more than a year later. The murder of Grigori Rasputin is the stuff of legends. You may have heard or read the classic story according to which he was tougher to take out than a coked up John McClane on steroids, and that it took massive doses of poison, a severe beating, several bullets, and a plunge into a freezing river to finally kill him. Well, we'll get to that later. But first, allow me to cover his alleged healing powers. According to modern sources, openly pro-Tsarist and pro-Orthodox, Rasputin healed at least 2 individuals following traumatic incidents. The first was the daughter of Prime Minister Stolypin, severely wounded in a bombing attack perpetrated by Marxist terrorists on August 15, 1906. According to newspaper reports of the time, however, the girl died as a consequence of her injuries. So he didn't heal her at all, she just died from a bomb. That's it. The attack also wounded Stolypin's younger son. According to author Joseph Furman, Rasputin did visit him at the hospital, but there's no account of the mystic attempting to heal him. The second healing allegedly took place when Anna Verbova, a lady-in-waiting to the Tsarina, was involved in a train crash in January 1915. She lost the use of her legs following the accident, but credited Rasputin's prayers for saving her life. Now, the only primary source I could find related to her was her interrogation conducted in May 1917 by the Extraordinary Commission of the Provisional Government installed after the Revolution of February 1917. The context: this was the earlier revolution which installed the government of Alexander Kerensky, later toppled by Lenin's October Revolution. Yeah, this was a turbulent time in Russian history. In the interrogation, Fedorova is thoroughly grilled about hers and the Tsar's relationship with Rasputin, whom she staunchly defends. And yet, she does not say a word about the train crash and its consequences. I understand that she may not have been willing to claim that she was miraculously healed in such an official context, but I find it curious that she did not even mention that Rasputin visited, comforted, or prayed for her on such a distressing occasion. Therefore, I'm inclined to dismiss this healing claim, as it may have been inflated or created by a pro-Rasputin author. Yeah, if the primary sources say no, then there's no evidence. Just seems to be no evidence. So you just can't be like, oh, it's true. You gotta prove it's true. Let's focus on the more frequent, better documented instances in which the Siberian Starets intervened to cure Prince Alexei's hemophilia. Just like any young child, the Tsarevich was prone to falls, bumps, and minor accidents while playing around. Being a hemophiliac, however, this meant that some minor physical trauma could result in major bleeding due to a deficiency in clotting factor. The doctors at court were mostly impotent to treat this condition, but it appears that Rasputin was able to stop the bleeding simply with the power of prayer. For example, in December 1915, Tsarina's sister Olga documented in her diaries how Prince Alexei had been bleeding in pain after yet another incident. As the doctors fumbled about, Rasputin was summoned by the Tsarina. On December 6th, the mystic showed up at the kid's bedside and made the sign of the cross over him. Apparently, that's all it took to stem the hemorrhage. On other occasions, Rasputin didn't even need to be present to perform his miracle. Back in October 1912, Alexei suffered a fall while getting out of a boat, which resulted in a hemorrhage in his thigh and groin. The 8-year-old prince lay in a state of feverish pain for 3 weeks, until the Tsarina and lady-in-waiting sent a telegram to Rasputin, who was in Siberia at the time, asking him to pray for Alexei. Rasputin's reply soon reached them, saying, quote, "God has seen your tears and heard your prayers. Do not grieve. The little one will not die. Do not allow the doctors to bother him too much, and the bleeding stops soon after." A miracle? If I remember this correctly, weren't the doctors doing something, like, because they were back in the day doctors, so maybe they were, like, giving him leeches and other stuff. Rasputin's like, yo, no medicine. Stop with the leeches. And because this is the past, it actually worked. At least according to Anglophone Orthodox and pro-Tsarist outlets, it is a miracle. They appear to defend Rasputin and the Romanovs at every occasion, painting them in a saintly light. I'm not going into details of every single occasion in which Rasputin allegedly healed the prince, but they seem to fall into two cases. One, either the mystic simply prayed by the boy's bedside, or two, he explicitly advised for the doctors to not bother them, or him. That last detail was highlighted as significant by Swiss author Pierre Gilliard, who worked at the Romanovs' court as a French tutor to Alexei and his sisters. According to him, the court doctors insisted on administering aspirin, which is a blood thinner, right? Because they give it to people who have had strokes or like high blood pressure or something like that, to reduce the risk of stroke. It was to relieve the pain caused by his bleeding episodes. At the time, aspirin was still a relatively recent drug, used primarily as an anti-inflammatory to manage fever and pain. However, the drug is also a thinning agent, currently still prescribed to prevent blood clots and some strokes. Gilliard clearly had a more scientific outlook than the Tsarina, or her sister, and speculated that the aspirin prescribed by Alexei actually prolonged the bleeding episodes. Thus, by shielding the young patient from the doctors, Rasputin didn't actually heal him, but inadvertently prevented the hemorrhages from getting worse. As I mentioned earlier, Rasputin did not explicitly overrule the doctors on every occasion, but we can speculate that his mere presence at court implied the absence of medical professionals, even if not stated explicitly by the witnesses. Now, there is another element to consider here. Currently, hemophilia is categorized as mild, moderate, or severe based on the levels of clotting factor in the blood. Several patients may experience life-threatening blood loss. Sure, mild or moderate patients, however, may experience prolonged bleeding, but these may eventually resolve by themselves. Patients affected by severe hemophilia frequently suffer from spontaneous bleeds with no apparent cause. This is not the case with Alexei, which leads me to speculate that he suffered from the mild or moderate kind. Hence, it may be possible that Alexei's hemorrhages may have ceased by themselves, given him enough time, proper rest, and the absence of aspirin. So, of course, it's not a miracle, it's just like chance. And I don't think he knew this about the aspirin, right? It's just, he did it once and it worked, so he did it again. Like, don't give him drugs or don't see the doctors. Which can look very convincing if you don't know what's going on. So all those prophecies we just looked at, they come from later secondhand sources. But to be fair, there are two promising exceptions, two pieces of correspondence apparently dictated by Rasputin during his lifetime. The first is the telegram sent to the Tsar in July 1914, advising him not to go to war, lest the monarchy crumble. But as mentioned earlier, this was more of a piece of sound strategic advice, rather than an actual prophecy. The second piece of correspondence is a letter written by Rasputin shortly before his death, in which he predicted his own assassination and the ruin of the Romanovs. To quote, "I feel that I shall leave life before January 1st. I wanted to make known to the Russian people, to Papa Tsar Nicholas, the Russian mother Tsarina Alexandra, and to the children. If it was your relations who have wrought my death, then none of your children will remain alive for more than 2 years. And if they do, they will beg for death, as they will see the defeat of Russia, see the Antichrist coming, plague, poverty, destroyed churches, and desecrated sanctuaries where everyone is dead. The Russian Tsar will be killed by the Russian people." I mean, yes, okay, that's mostly accurate, but it's also like it was at a time when the Russian Tsarina was immensely unpopular. It's not hard to see that could change. As we'll see later, the mystic was indeed murdered by the Tsar's relations, and Russia did suffer untold misery under the First Civil War and Bolshevik totalitarianism later. So quite impressive, yes? Well, not according to Allison Hudson. Writing for, Skeptoid.com, Hudson writes that this death letter first appeared in the 1920s memoirs of one uh, Aaron Simonovich, a friend of Rasputin. He claimed to have received it from Tsarina Alexandra and kept it after the entire Romanov family was massacred by the Bolsheviks. So once again, we're dealing with secondhand information written after the facts had taken place. Yes, 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 so it can't be trusted. Unless they had that original letter, and they somehow managed to carbon date the ink and stuff like that. But even then, you could just be using older ink and older paper and writing it out. Maybe there's some clever way of science can figure this out, but I doubt that's happened. Maybe the letter's not even around anymore. It's just way too convenient, isn't it? One of the facts in question is Grigori Rasputin's own death, an event which has contributed largely to his legend as a quasi-supernatural being. Rasputin's assassination took place on December 30th, 1916, and it was the result of a plot hatched by Prince Felix Yusupov, husband of the Tsarina's niece, along with 4 conspirators. Yusupov saw Rasputin as a danger to the Romanovs and to Russia itself, and devised a plan to lure the mystic to his own Petrograd basement apartment, where he would be served tea, cakes, and wine laced with cyanide. According to Yusupov, the first part of the plan went as expected. In the night between the 29th and 30th of December, Rasputin gorged himself on the rich, poisonous buffet, but he did not go down. Around 2 a.m., the conspirators became impatient. Rasputin had to go fast, lest they have to dispose of the body in the light of day. At 2:30 a.m., Yusupov took charge, grabbed a revolver, and shot Rasputin in the stomach at short range. That's crazy. Yusupov's all like, fuck this shit, just die already. The mystic lay on the floor for almost an hour, when the murderers noticed something stirring in Yusupov's own recollection, quote, "All of a sudden, I saw the left eye open. A few seconds later, his right eyelid began to quiver, then open. I then saw both eyes, the green eyes of a viper staring at me with an expression of diabolic hatred." This is when Rasputin proved to be allegedly indestructible. According to Yusupov, the Siberian leapt to his feet, bowing and blood oozing from his mouth, and charged at the aristocrat. To quote him again, "He rushed at me, trying to get my throat, and sank his fingers into my shoulder like steel claws." Rasputin shoved Yusupov aside and fled the building, as the other conspirators gave chase, firing their pistols at Rasputin, ran through the building's courtyard. 2 bullets hit him in the back and through the head, knocking him to the ground. That's gonna take him out. He's already been shot in the stomach an hour ago. So was the headshot fatal? Maybe yes, maybe not. To be on the safe side, Yusupov grabbed a club and produced to clobber his unkillable target. Then he and the conspirators removed Rasputin's body and dumped it in the river. According to some secondhand retellings of the event, Rasputin was still breathing at this stage, and the freezing waters of the river finally killed him. The same sources even claim that when his body was recovered, his right hand was held up as if he'd been trying to make the sign of the cross, an indication that he may have survived for a while even after the icy plunge. Yusupov's account of the assassination contributed to building the legend of Rasputin as a superhuman character, feeding into the narrative of those who want to paint him as either a demon or an angel on earth. This version of events, however, is in stark contrast with the autopsy report, which tells a very different story. The autopsy was performed by Yusupov and already confessed to the crimes. The coroner in charge looked for traces of cyanide in Rasputin's body. The surgeon did find a large quantity of alcohol in his stomach, no doubt Madeira, but no traces of poison. This can be explained in a couple of different ways. According to author Sergei Fomin, Yusupov delegated the poisoning part to an accomplice, Vladimir Perishkovich. At the time, Perishkovich got cold feet, and instead of lacing Rasputin's refreshments with cyanide, he used aspirin instead. An alternative explanation, ventured among skeptoid users and others, is that Yusupov simply lied in his account of the murder. The aristocrat embellished the assassination, portraying it as a sort of epic boss battle in which the health bar of an almost indestructible Rasputin gradually took hits from poison, bullets, beatings, and freezing water. Other findings from the post-mortem confirmed that Yusupov may have been an unreliable narrator. He claimed that Rasputin took one shot from the front to the stomach and two from behind to the back of the head. The autopsy found that Rasputin took 2 shots to the back and a frontal one to the head. This suggests that the mystic was first shot from behind, fell to the ground, rolled over, then took a final bullet to the head, killing him. This is another point, by the way. The coroner found no traces of water in Rasputin's lungs. Hence, he could not possibly have been alive when he was thrown in the river. There's another point of contention regarding Rasputin's assassination, and that is the involvement of the British intelligence services. According to author Andrew Cook, one of the conspirators and possibly the one who fired the fatal shot was British spy Oswald Rayner, a good friend of Yusupov's since meeting at Oxford. In a way, the British connection would make sense. Rasputin was notoriously opposed to the war, while British agents in Petrograd were striving to keep Russia in the fight as long as possible. Sergei Fomin is a proponent of a similar theory. According to him, the British Prime Minister himself, Lloyd George, ordered Rayner to orchestrate the murder. The motive? Lloyd George intended to harm the Romanovs and Christian civilization by killing the Tsar's spiritual mentor. Douglas Smith could not let this claim pass. So in his quest to desensationalize Rasputin's life, Smith scoured the British National Archives, searching for any evidence of Rayner's involvement. But he found nothing that corroborates it. Yeah, and it's been hundreds of years, so if there was something to come out, it would have come out by now. I took a peep too and found that the British ambassador to Petrograd, George Buchanan, was aware of a plot to murder Rasputin well in advance. Even Rayner's superior in Russia had been informed of the conspiracy by Vladimir Perushkevich back in November 1916. Finally, Yusupov wrote in his memoirs that the day after the murder, he dined with Rayner, noting that, quote, he knew of our conspiracy and had come in search of news. So if Rayner was in search of news, he was not there on the night of the murder. Okay, Yusupov's not the most reliable source, but there's no solid proof of Rayner's culpability, so we have to assume his innocence. So what do we have proof of? What we do have proof of, however, is that British intelligence was well aware of the impending assassination and did nothing to prevent it, nor warned the authorities. I mean, it's not really in their interest. Just because they're not behind it doesn't mean they're going to be like, oh, let's tell. It's like, no, they just be like, cool, yeah, that sounds good, carry on. We can speculate that Rasputin's death served their goals exactly, and their inaction effectively amounted to a blessing. Yeah, but importantly, no, it didn't. Like, legally, it's like, oh no, you shouldn't do that, should you? You definitely wouldn't have wanted to do that. That would have been, brilliant. And now that we've entered the realm of spy stories, let's tackle final mystery around our favorite Siberian wandering mystic. As soon as the first slanderous rumors began circulating in the early 1910s, Rasputin was said to conspire with Tsarina Alexandra to further a German agenda. The Empress was, after all, German in origin. When the Great War started, these rumors picked up pace, morphing into something more concrete. The implication that Rasputin was a spy on Germany's payroll, and his pacifist stance was simply directed at removing Russia from the conflict. As a tactic, it would be a sound one, influencing the ruler of an enemy country by puppeteering said ruler's unofficial advisor. In practice, would this tactic work? As we've learned, Rasputin's influence over the Tsar has been overstated. He may have been able to direct the Tsarina's actions, but when Alexandra approached Nicholas to relay the latest piece of wisdom from the mystic, the Tsar typically reacted by ignoring it. If the German secret services weren't stupid, and I guess they weren't, why throw time, money, and effort at a tactic that was clearly not working? Legendary legend Douglas Smith could not let this claim pass either, and he plunged in the German National Archives. Dude, this guy does his research. He's like, yeah, no, it makes no sense, but just to doubly prove this, lets look through really old documents. Interestingly, he found that German intelligence did keep a close eye on Rasputin, to the point of fascination. But in reality, they did not control him. In fact, Berlin's agents wondered who controlled him, if at all. They even invented the idea of bribing him, but they did not carry out the plan. It's now time to cork the bottle and draw the conclusions of this long, Madeira-fueled overview of Rasputin's life, death, and alleged miracles. My whole opinion is that the legacy of Grigori Rasputin has become a symbolic battlefield for supporters and denigrators of the Romanovs and the Russian Empire as a whole. In one corner, we have those who say Nicholas and Alexandra were great folk. Rasputin was their friend, and he was also a saint. But bad people conspired against them, and so they slandered both the royal couple and the mystic. And in the opposite corner, we have another faction shouting that the Romanovs were incompetent fools, the epitome of a worn-out, ill-advised institution. Their best pal was this demonic drunkard, sex addict, mad monk, so they all deserved to be wiped out. What authors such as Douglas Smith have reminded us is that Grigori Rasputin was neither a demon nor a saint. He was a human being. He did not perform miraculous healings, and his scant predictions were based on common sense. He did appear to have something of a sex addiction and behaved inappropriately with his admirers. But he did not indulge in orgiastic rituals, nor did he seduce the Tsarina or her daughters. He did not bend the Tsar to his will, but he did discuss some policy matters with the royals, although Nicholas was not overly receptive to the ideas. He was his own man, and he did not rely on paychecks from Berlin. And though he did not endure massive amounts of punishment before dying, he went down with a bullet to the head, just like any other average Joe. What seems to be lost in the hail of conspiracies, miracles, and gigantic manhoods is that Grigori Rasputin was a semi-illiterate commoner from a remote corner of the Russian Empire, who, through sheer will, faith, and a good amount of help from the right connections, worked his way up to a close friendship with autocrats in charge of the largest country on earth. And that is remarkable enough in itself. The Siberian mystic would have deserved a place in history, even without the exaggerations of the crazed, the pro-czars, or the Yusupovs of this world. During my research, I've encountered some outlandishly bonkers conspiracy theories about Rasputin, which I decided not to include because it was too difficult, and I was tired. According to an anonymous source, Grigori Rasputin was none other than the latest incarnation of an immortal being known as the Count of Saint Germain, who attracted much attention and prominence in 18th century France. Saint Germain is believed to be an immortal being who pops up at key points in history to bring about momentous change. And so it was that Saint Germain popped up in Russia as Rasputin with the goal of paving the way for the Bolshevik Revolution. But after becoming the target of several assassination attempts, Rasputin, Saint Germain, faked his own death, allowed himself to be buried, and then tunneled out of his own grave. Of course he did. It sounds reasonable. People tunnel out of graves all the time. According to this story, it's not clear if the revolution was caused by Saint Germain Rasputin or not. The narrative picks up again in the late 1980s when the immortal causes the collapse of communism in Eastern Europe before relocating to Los Angeles. Of course he does. According to those in the know, Saint Germain's latest incarnation is comedian and solid character actor Kevin Pollak, best remembered for performances in A Few Good Men and The Usual Suspects. But, of course, that's ludicrous. But anyways, thanks for being here. If you enjoy the show, leave a review and a rating on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, like and subscribe. And if you want to support the channel, you can buy us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Larry M. Lease or use the link in the description today. And we will see you in our next episode. Take care. Hello and welcome to the Dead Reckoning podcast. As you can see, we're doing a full-length marathon of our top episodes of 2025. So, when you're seeing this, Merry Christmas, and we hope you have a Happy New Year, and we will see you back in 2026. 6. And without further ado, let's start the show.